Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I am your host, Nikki Ship, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hey everyone, welcome back to Pieces for My Puzzle. My name is Nikki and I am your puzzle master for this episode. Last week we spoke about believing in your child and how it starts with your mindset first before taking steps into getting the resources that you need for your child. This week we're going to be discussing what you should do if you think that you may have a child on the spectrum and you don't necessarily have a diagnosis yet. So it's all about getting a diagnosis and finding the resources that you need. So even if you do currently have a diagnosis, some of this might be a good reminder to you, especially if you're trying to find resources at this time. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So we noticed that Drayson, last time I kind of told a little bit more about Drayson, and I kind of told you in the last episode, in episode 1, that, Drayson just wouldn't talk to us, and he wouldn't call me mom, and he wasn't saying dad. There was no contact, eye contact, and a lot of tippy-toe walking. So, and we started to notice what we call, what you've probably heard the term sensory issues. We started noticing some sensory things as well. Certain fabrics he didn't like to wear, textures of food would bother him. It just seemed like more so than the other kiddos. So it's good to always know and be aware of early signs. And for someone who does have experience with someone on the spectrum, it's easy to know those early signs. But not having a kiddo on the spectrum, or maybe you have your first child, or there's nothing to compare to, right? You want to understand what those early signs are for at least getting in and getting a consultation. So you are the one that sees your child the most. So the first suggestion that I have for you, and the first recommendation that I always give to a lot of parents, I've spoken to a lot of parents over the years, is document, write things down. Make sure that you're documenting the behaviors that you're seeing and what you're noticing at home, so that when you do go to a professional to talk to them about an evaluation, you have exact data of what you're seeing. Keep a notepad, or even record some of the behaviors that you're seeing on video on your phone is also a really great thing to do. And autism diagnosis can start really at a very young age. Drayson was diagnosed at the age of 3. And now they can diagnose as early as, I think they've said earliest cases is less than 12 months. But typically diagnosis happens around between the age of 2 and 3 right now. So some of the things to make sure that you're looking for is that you're noticing how they interact with people. Social skills is one of the biggest, I guess, I don't want to say problem, but it's one of the biggest obstacles for kids on the spectrum. So if you're noticing that they are not making eye contact, they are not engaging in conversation, they are kind of staying secluded and on their own, or maybe you've noticed that they've had acquired speech, or they've been kind of babbling as a younger child, and then all of a sudden there was a regression. They're no longer doing that stuff. Maybe they were social and all of a sudden they're not. And that can also be a sign or a symptom. Difficulty understanding other people's feelings. I always have to kind of laugh because Drayson is very, what you see is what you get. So even if you show that you're upset or not happy about something, he kind of has this I don't care attitude. So that's really a big one too, if they're not able to calculate or see other people's feelings. They'll also have delayed speech sometimes, and also persistent repetition of words. Let me say that 3 times really fast. But persistent repetition of words is what they call echolalia, is also really common. We noticed that with Drayson. He would watch a show and then turn around and script the whole entire show back to us, but was not able to tell me what he wanted for dinner, or call me by my name, or even get himself dressed. So that's when we kind of knew that something was really going on. Very restricted interests and very repetitive behaviors, flapping, rocking or spinning, sometimes very motion sensory related. The motion sensory is a soothing mechanism for them, so that's why that happens sometimes, or their way of coping with something that's giving them a sensory overload. Unusual and intense reactions to sounds and smells, tastes and textures, lights and even colors. Some kiddos on the spectrum are very sensitive to sound. Some of them, they won't even flinch when they hear a loud sound. So I guess that's kind of part of what the word spectrum is about, right? And I always say that when you've met one autistic kid, you've only met one autistic kid, because the spectrum is vast. So there is a variance to all of these things that I'm describing right now. So my biggest piece of advice to you is not to ignore it just because you don't want to face it. And like I talked about in episode 1, in my last episode, about how it starts with belief and shifting your mindset, this is kind of similar in the sense of you don't want to ignore it. If you're noticing little subtle signs and symptoms and you're concerned about it, talk to your healthcare professional about it, talk to your pediatrician, and get a referral if you need it. It might be difficult to address a lot of these things. And I think what's hard is that we, by nature, always want to brag about our kids. We always want to we're so proud that we want to be able to kind of brag and show off about our kids. And what's hard about this scenario is that this isn't a bragging. This isn't a show off. This is the harsh reality of the behaviors that you're seeing. And so I think it's really important to be able to level with yourself that this needs to get looked at. So like I had mentioned, make sure that you ask your pediatrician. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't go to Google for a diagnosis. Please don't do that. You know, self-diagnosing sometimes can be hugely misleading, and you don't want to put ideas in your head that might not be there. Definitely seek professional help. And like I said, take all of your documentation with you, what you're seeing, what you're noticing, maybe some video, so that professional can see what you're observing. You are the one that is in the most contact with your child. You are the one that is seeing all these behaviors. And sometimes they're not always going to replicate certain behaviors in front of these professionals. So it makes it very difficult to describe sometimes. If your pediatrician gives you a referral, or ask for a referral, even if they don't willingly offer one to you, if you do have a deep concern about it, this is the time when you have to follow your intuition and ask for the referral. If they don't provide a referral for some reason, look into finding a developmental pediatrician or an agency that can do evaluations, such as there's specialized autism centers. I would recommend doing a Google search on. Put it in there and look for a specialized autism center to see if they do assessments to help determine if your kiddo might be on the spectrum. There is also now new and emerging, something new over these last couple years that I've noticed is a lot of telehealth evaluation providers too, which is pretty extraordinary, where you can actually do everything online. So that is another option that you can look for too, which is also kind of great if you're afraid or feel a little intimidated to go someplace else to talk to somebody about the evaluation. Telehealth might be a good route for you as well. Autism Speaks has a great resource of many categories that you can go to for an evaluation, and the link will be posted in the show notes, but I highly recommend that you go to autismspeaks.org and look up some of the resources that they have. Ask your professional what to do first and create a list. And what I recommend is once you have the diagnosis, that's the first step that you take, is you go ahead and make a list of the things that you're going to need to do. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples right now. The first is I would contact Developmental Disabilities, or DDD, Department of Developmental Disabilities. Every state has it. Every state provides state services, and look up what your local state DDD is and start looking into what the application process is to get your child services. Oftentimes with a kiddo on the spectrum, they need more than just speech and occupational therapy. So a lot of kiddos need what we call applied behavior analysis, or ABA therapy, which is really, really common and is actually one of the therapies of choices for people on the spectrum. The other thing is IEPs and school services. If your child is already in school and not preschool age, but already in school, make sure that you get an established IEP. If you don't have one already, and if you do, then make sure that that diagnosis gets added on to that IEP. And in future episodes, we will delve in a little bit more about IEPs as well. I could probably write about 50 episodes on IEPs alone. And write down the types of therapies that they're going to need, a speech therapist, an occupational therapist. Also, if they have additional healthcare providers besides their pediatrician, maybe your developmental pediatrician, make sure that you have a list of all of those providers and therapies that you're going to be needing to do. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and autism, and like I mentioned earlier, Autism Speaks, they both have really great resources. And I really recommend that you go to the CDC and actually look up some of their resources that they have, as well as some articles. They have a lot of scientific articles that they've published on research about autism, just to help you gain an understanding. The biggest gift that you can give yourself is an education about kids on the spectrum or people on the spectrum. Learn as much as you can and take in that information. And the Center for Disease Control, like I said, does have a link that I will go ahead and post in the show notes, but you can go to cdc.gov and look up autism in their search bar, and it will go ahead and direct you to all of the resources that they have. Autism Speaks has something called a 100 Days Kit. And I really love this because it's a resource guide with tons of links for you to go to that are just statewide and nationwide. But they do provide you at least some ideas of where you need to go on a state level. And I highly, highly recommend that you can download their resource guide, print it even if you want to, and use it to make notes around it. But they do have quite the great database of information on there as well. At the end of every episode, I want to do a story highlight for families that to celebrate the wins with their child on the spectrum. So if you have a story that you would like to share with us, please email us at pieces4mypuzzle.com. Today's story highlight is going to be another story about Drayson, and I want to tell you about the time that Drayson put himself in a timeout. So one of the things that we really wanted to work on with Drayson was communication, and Drayson wasn't speaking much at the time. He was about 4 years old, and we also wanted to teach him responsibility of cleanup, putting away your toys, just simple little things like that. And on this particular day, my husband came home from work and was cleaning up the house and wanted Drayson to put his Hot Wheel cars back in his little toy bin. And Drayson just wasn't having it. He wanted to leave them right where they were. They were sitting on the coffee table, all lined up, I think even color-coded. He would take his Hot Wheels and color code them and put them in specific groups. And he had it all organized, and he just didn't want to put them away. So my husband told him, you need to put your toys away or you're going to go into a timeout. Well, we had been talking about Drayson about expressing his feelings and expressing his actions, but never really saw any engagement from him on it. And Pat said it about 3 or 4 times, and finally on the 4th time, he raised his voice and he said, "Put your toys away or you're going into timeout." Drayson walked over to the coffee table, full eye contact at my husband, which also is unusual because he doesn't engage in eye contact, takes his hand and pushes all of the cars off the coffee table and they go flying onto the floor. He then proceeds to turn around, walk himself into the corner, sits down, and puts himself in his own timeout. And me, being the great parent that I am, I hide behind the cabinet and I'm trying not to laugh hysterically because I'm looking at the look on my husband's face and thinking to myself, he doesn't know what to do. We told Drayson that he was going to go into timeout if he didn't put his toys away, but yet he was telling us that he disapproved of what he was being told to do. So he acted out and then put himself in his own timeout as if he knew what the consequence was already going to be. So for us, that was a huge win. I know it sounds a little odd, but it was a form of communication that we had never seen from Drayson before. So my husband just walked away. Drayson sat in timeout for a little while. And after about 5 minutes, Pat walked over and said, "Are you ready to put your cars away?" And he said, "Yep," and got up and put his cars back in the toy bin. And that was the end of it. But at the same time, we were just laughing hysterically on the inside because we just felt that this was a form of communication that we were getting from him that we had never seen before. So that is my story for today. If you have a story that you would like to share with us, please email us at info@piecesformypuzzle.com, and hopefully we'll be able to feature your story on one of our upcoming podcasts. So this concludes our episode for today. I want to thank you for tuning in and listening. Please like and follow us on Facebook or Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Pieces for My Puzzle. If you like what you're hearing, please spread the word to others. This would help us help spread the word about awareness on autism. And feel free to give us a good rating on your preferred podcast platform that you choose. And also, I think this week is Valentine's. So with that being said, happy Valentine's Day to all of you. And next week, we are going to talk about IEPs and how to navigate the initial process with them. So until next time, keep working on your puzzle. And remember, you don't have to have it all solved in a day. Take care.